Well, Donald, how are you? How's things, my friend? Thanks very much for coming on. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. This is your third stint on the Zoom room. I have to say, you're also like Adam Kendall, bit of the point, one of the pioneers that come on at the start, Um, and now you are on your third one. They say third time's the charm. Um, I, 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 I don't know whether you'd agree with that or whether you wouldn't agree with that. I'm not too sure.
Right, I'm quite happy to come on and chat. I enjoy talking. I haven't been able to join a couple of the most recent ones that you've posted because of other commitments, but it's kind of the only way I think these days you're going to be able to run a club because everybody's far apart. But it's a brilliant way that
Yeah,
people
yeah.
from all over can connect.
And I think, unfortunately, probably with the way society has gone, we are very time poor.
Yeah,
Like back in the day, you sort of looked forward to your club event because it was probably the highlight of a couple of weeks of work. And I think we've all got caught up in life being busy, and we have all so many more interests than just boards. And I think that's sometimes a detriment to the hobby. That's why you see board clubs or drum meetings, but they're fairly poorly attended, because people don't generally have the time anymore.
it's kind of wider than that. I think in some ways it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the local church, the golf club, the bowling club, the bird club. It doesn't matter. Nobody is interested in joining things that they have to take responsibility for organising. It's just the way societies move. We all want to take part in events, but we don't necessarily want to organise them. And as you see people get older and older, fewer and fewer people are able to organise things. It's going to be interesting just to see where lots of hobbies. You see, we live beside a bowling club. I think it hosts more funeral parties than it does bowling events. And it's just the way that society's gone, I'm afraid. There we go.
Yeah, and probably definitely in the board hobby, probably in the last 5, maybe 10 years, we've seen several clubs cease to exist, and not due to financial reasons, and probably not due to
Well,
member
absolutely.
reasons.
I've kept birds since I was about 12, and I'll be 65 in April. I haven't always exhibited them, and sometimes I've only kept a very few, and other times I've kept a lot more. And I came back to the exhibition side of the hobby really in 2011, and since then, instead of going to 9 shows a year, I'm probably reduced to between 3 and 4. And that's largely because clubs across Scotland more or less vanished. Linlithgow is the most recent one. It's about 40-minute drive from me, but Norman Blade, who was instrumental in keeping going down last year, and the rest of the committee are all very elderly. Nobody wants to take on the running of it. So I think it's kind of sad in some respects, but you're going to keep the hobby going, I think, by things like this, where people actually can meet together, and who couldn't physically, none of us could physically really get together any other way. I can see this as really as being a future, but I was down in Carlisle at the weekend, at the sale there, and it was interesting that there are actually quite a large number of people who are buying birds and keeping them, and I just wonder whether it's the exhibition side of the hobby, the bit that needs run, if you follow my drift, that may be the bit that's actually the weakest link. Maybe people will carry on keeping birds quite interested in exhibiting.
Yeah, because the budgies have sort of started to think to get. I'm not saying, I don't know how they're probably articulated. It's not to say normal fanciers, but hobby fanciers, like lads that keep pet style budgies, not exhibition style budgies, and people who
budgies that can fly, you mean? Budgies that actually are able to breed, can see out of their eyes. And have feathers that actually look like they might cover the body instead of just being some sort of burst. Every time I see photographs on the internet of exhibition budgies, I just want to put the emperors naked. They're ludicrously unattractive creatures. It's all about just for the head. I mean,
It's the big head, the big high
so-
rise on the head, yeah.
anyway, not my
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, not your, you, it says you're part of the old and rare fraternity, and we're not just talking personally old and rare as you may be. As you know, we're also talking with the agricultural side of things, of the old and rare, which we've had many a giggle about, we've had many a laugh about. That a man of your sort of your grace in the world, as to why you have a penance to bear, that you feel you need to take on a breed that at times would drive you to drink, like I mean, is this are you a religious man?
No, not in the slightest. How could
Yeah,
I be?
yeah, I didn't think you were. I just had to ask before I try and insult you or anything. No, but you seem to be taking on this mantle of saving the old and rare, and it's probably aged you. Like, you're probably only about 35, but your face tells 100 different stories.
I think I remember being asked years ago at a show, this chap he'd kept Scots for a long time. He said to me, "Why have you taken them up?" And I really struggled to answer the question, beyond the fact that I just find them, Scott, find it a very attractive bird. But I have also said to people that when I came back, I decided I wanted to keep Scots fancies. That's what I wanted. But of course, there's so little modern literature about them. And what I was really looking at were pictures of Belgians or very old-fashioned Scots fancies. Because like what you have here, the Belgians here, and the Scots, they're recreations. They're not the original creature. So I suppose it was then finding that actually I could find Belgians and could work with those. I mean, given the three varieties I keep, probably if I was going to choose one, if I had to put a gun to my head and said you got to choose one, I'd probably keep the Belgians. And yeah, they can be, I suppose they're frustrating up to a point. That they're certainly probably less productive, but it's a much bigger variety. And when I say less productive, I've had them with nests of 5 and 6 that they've raised, and then you'll get nests of 1 and 2. So that variation is probably the bit that's more frustrating than anything else.
Yeah. Now, I think you spoke there. You spoke there like that the era of recreation. They're not. We're dealing from a strain of birds that no longer existed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's easy and it's not complex. You're talking about going to visit the Golden Ring. Golden Ring, the exhibition hall's on the motorway, and if you turn left, you turn into the car park of the exhibition hall. If you turn right, you head to eat on the Menin Gate. I thought the Menin Gate was a separate thing. It's not. It's part of the town wall around each. And you drive along country roads, and there's a cemetery. There's a cemetery. There's a cemetery. The whole of Flanders was flattened twice in 20 years. So by the end of 1945, there's about 2 people literally in southern Belgium who happen to have a few Belgian canarys left. And so what you're seeing is a recreation as best they could do. And it's first exhibited as its modern form in 1958, 13 years after the war ends. The year I was born, that's when it reappeared. Scots Fancy by 1945, there was Ochterlony, the golf professional St Andrews, had the last stock in Scotland, and there were a couple of people down south. And that, I don't know fully what went into the recreation of the Scots, but filled canaries of some sort have been used. But if you read the old books, you'll find that the filling on both these varieties was there from the beginning. Yeah. So it's nothing particularly new. Interestingly, and I don't know why I had never come across this properly until the other day, I do obsess a little about the feather on varieties. Filling, especially on the Scots, is irritating. And I am certain it's a recessive gene. You can put 2 birds together, completely clean chested, and you'll get a bird as filling. That says the recessive. The Belgian is very similar, but there are ways in which you can breed the birds that eliminates it. And there's one example, I'll go some more detail later, but the one I'm hanging on the perch there just now, its father has a bit of a frill, but it's really clear.
Now, with the fact that it's a recreation, where are you leading from the expertise that it's of the right standard? Do you find yourself that you have a load of people come out of woodwork as experts that this is a proper Belgian because that's what they have in their shed?
Well, no, I think that one of the when I first bought them, I don't know how many of you know Dave Hobart in Cumbria. Dave's a lovely guy, and I bought the first stock from him. Dave said to me, "Don't breed them with the Scots," and I said, "Don't worry, I have no intention of doing so." They were very interbred. There was money to be made. So in the Edwardian period before the First War, and then into the 20s, to replenish the Belgian stock, they were crossing the Scots into the Belgian. If you look at old pictures of the Scots fancy, I'm looking at pictures of what I regard as a Belgian. So they'd got so crossed that they were, you could have entered either in a class, nobody would have really known the difference. That's not the case now. They're completely different. You would benefit neither by crossing them.
And is there any board today? Is there any board today across the whole fancy that resembles the board from 1953?
Oh, probably.
Like if you look at Border, you look at Gloucester's, you look at Borders, Gloucester's, Fife. Like a Fife is a relatively new breed. 1986 became registered. All that people are keeping the early 70s, but the board that won for Terry Kelly in the National in like the 90s resembles nothing of the Fife of today.
So, and they don't, because I think it's interesting that people's choices and fashions, I'm sure Russell would see it in the dog world as well. Fashions arise and the mob follows that. I hadn't appreciated really until this year. I was chatting to our club president, Sandy Innes, at the club show, and Sandy said to me, "Well, I can see your birds, Donald, because I can identify the style." I wasn't aware that I had actually created one, but now he's said it, and having looked around the shows a couple of times this last season, I thought, actually, you're quite correct, actually. But I hadn't fully appreciated that's what had happened. That you said, you know, does somebody walk in the shed and go, "Well, this is the correct thing"? Well, no, there is the COM standards. That's, you know, there's the answer. But and interestingly, I don't know, many of you get occasionally with your birds, but I've been writing reviews of Norbert Schramm's books, which have been translated from the German into English, and I've helped him with the most recent one that is now just being printed, in which he goes through all the varieties, a little repetitive in terms of the style for each variety is very much the same in the writing, but he gives you the approved standard for each of them. It's very interesting. I think it'll become quite an essential book for people who want to know what they're actually trying to breed to.
Yeah, but I think the book is quite difficult to get. I've been onto the author.
Well, this new one, I don't know how he posted something on Facebook the other day about the access to it. So, and then he sent me one to reviewers, and I had to go back and say thanks very much, Norbert. Trouble is, I don't speak German. You've spent the German edition. If you send me the English one, I'll have a go at reviewing it for you.
Yeah, because I would like to purchase the 3 books, and I contacted the author, but he sent me a website, and you may be able to buy the English version on it, but the website is in German, and I hadn't a notion where I was going around the place. So he may sell, but I don't know whether he sells it direct, whether it's self-published or printed, but if there's ever a link you can find that we could.
I will print that.
You'll forward them on to you. But
it's very useful.
But
you were saying that they'd kind of badged this out. What were my plans for this year? And I've got quite a clear answer to that, but it's maybe a bit complicated. I think
Donald, you are
all
not
that.
a simple man. You are not a simple man, my friend. I mean, you are not a simple man. So when you say to me it's complicated, that actually concerns me. It concern because your level of complication is probably something that most of us couldn't comprehend. For us, it'd be called chaos. So
Well, it's not. It's
enlighten
sometimes in
us.
here it feels chaotic. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
yeah. So following on from last year, obviously you had a good breeding. Well, we won't say a good breeding season. The Gabozos were less than
They were
product.
disappointing.
Yeah, is that disappointing? We should say, right? And I had a disappointing time with the Belgians, where this
Well, I
year
had
they
100% less disappointing than the was. I actually bred one, but you
won.
in
Yeah,
fact bred
I
zero.
not zero. But this year we are fresh and feeling vibrant that we're going to breed a few this year. We're
Good.
going to lead the charge. But obviously, you did good, successful show season last year. Obviously, that's a brilliant compliment. Someone saying they can spot your birds with style, because that's always a very good sign that you're making good progress. Some people who are not winning wouldn't find it very, because then people can pick out your birds because it has a certain style. But coming into this year, you've obviously a few Scots fancy still to go. I did hear a rumor on the train. We always hear we hear everything, Donald. We hear everything, everything. Be under no illusion. Myself and Graham Davis are that close to the ground. We could nearly rub our ears against it. We hear everything. So we know there's a couple of Scots fancy heading to Wales this week. We can
Sunday.
Allegedly, we won't confirm that, but in the way of Scots fancy, where are we going? Many pairs? What are we doing? Many pairs are we going with?
Well, this is what I sent you earlier on today. One of my favourite quotes from Blackson's Canary book, because I really do think it's something that everybody should bear in mind. I think that's it there. And that where it starts, I think, is I'm going to read it out. I'm very bad at reading aloud, but I do think it's useful. One of the greatest delusions we know of in connection with bird breeding is one of the most common, so common that but few fanciers have not had a touch of the complaint at some time or other. You go into a breeding room and find one or two fair average showbirds, the remains of the past show season, mated respectively, though cage after cage exhibits entire want of quality, but plenty of pairing, which must have been done without any settled purpose, except to hatch a lot of thorough rubbish to consume seed. You call attention to a very ordinary pair, something more than extra shabby, and ask what were they put up for? Well, they're not of much account, certainly, but I thought they would do to breed from. We've had that answer over and over again. To breed from? To breed what? Ex nihil fit, nothing comes to nothing. And I think that's actually something that everybody really does need to keep in mind. Partly that thought's come back to me very clearly, because after Stafford, I do listen to what people say. There are a lot of complaints that at Stafford, there was nothing for sale, everything was already sold. And that's fair comment. People use the tables there to take down birds for delivery. Why wouldn't you? It's a place that you can enough say to people, I'll pay a table, whatever, and sort it out. But I started to take down birds that were not ordered, but were just surplus and available to sell. And previous years, I think one year I took down about 14 pairs and brought back one. Last autumn, I took down 2 gash pairs, just surplus, and I brought back one, 50%. I went to Carlisle on Sunday, and Carlisle's a 2-hour drive. I could have got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and driven down to be there for 8, but to hell with that. We went and stayed overnight, very pleasant, nice night away, dinner, bed and breakfast. So by the time you tot up that and the petrol going down, I sold 14 birds there. It was a complete waste of time and money. I don't dislike Carlisle, but I could have gone somewhere else.
Yeah.
And a large part of me is going, what are we trying to breed and why are we breeding it? I think it's clear to me I'm not entirely sure that it's justified. People are concerned about money, I understand that. But if you're already in this hobby, or if you're thinking you're going to go into this hobby, you just all stop and think how much you've paid, how much you've spent to set up whatever setup you've got. You're not broke. But there's a clear nervousness, I think, about people committing to spending at the moment. And so part of me is going, well, here's a good reason for not overbreeding. Now, the drawback, of course, in the more peculiar varieties, especially the likes of the Belgian, we can forget about the Gabosa because the stocks there are so minimal in this country that's going to come to a natural end really very easily and not too distant future. If you don't breed enough, you're going to lose bloodline. But at the same time, if I'm breeding a quantity that I can't sell, what have I achieved? I don't.
And what is that number? Like, what do you
Well,
feel?
yeah, it's an interesting discussion, Paul. Ken Laurie, my pal, and who will remain secretary of the Scots Club till the AGM in March, and he's stepping down then. Ken's always said he was happy if he bred the same number of youngsters as he had adults. And I get that. That's fine. For me to dispose of 14 birds on Sunday, I had already disposed of about 16 when we were down in Stafford. There's another 6 to go this weekend, hopefully, and there's another 2 going away in March. Clearly, I've got more than I actually require. And I'm sitting there thinking, and the same thought came to my mind when you spoke earlier on about the cost of entering the World Show. Of course, it costs money. It's a professional organisation. This isn't 50 pence a head. I mean, for God's sake, what can you buy for 50 pence? I can't even buy a pack of bloody jelly babies for 50 pence.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But if you can choose a show team, then you already know which of your birds are worth breeding. Now, I don't determine fully who's going to breed by the results from the show, but if the results from the show confirm what I thought in the first place, then I know I'm on the right lines. And if I know I'm on the right lines, I can go, well, okay, at the end of the current process, I will have in the shed 35 Scots fancies. That's 17 pairs. 17 times 4 at one round is what, 40 plus 68 Scots fancies. If I then look at the 21 Belgians and I go, okay, that's 10 pairs, there's another 40, 108 we're at so far. I mean, this isn't 1960, 1970, it's 2023. And I have a setup out there that has 57 pages and an outside aviary. I haven't got the space for them.
Yeah, but will we find ourselves in a catch-22 then, that if we breed for self-sufficiency, which we all do, but if we cease the amount of, or reduce the amount of surplus birds we had, how do we encourage the hobby to grow when the obtaining of stock then will naturally become more difficult, Donald?
I don't disagree with you, Paul. I think it's interesting. Robin has occasionally said to me, you'd be a lot better off, Donald, if you lived down south. And at one level, but only at one very small level, he was probably correct. There are more of you keeping birds down south than there are Scotland.
Yeah.
I've got to leave Scotland to find other fanciers, generally speaking. I know Fraser's there, but there aren't that many of us up here really anymore. The clubs that were anywhere near me don't exist anymore. It's just gone. So there is little merit in my producing birds that I can't keep, that I don't need and I can't feed and keep. Is pointless. So my answer is, what are you breeding this for? And the answer is, if there were 14 of them surplus, they were surplus for a reason.
Yeah, because a good
Not
one
all
eats the
right.
same. A good one eats. The fancier always said to me that a good bird eats the same as a bad one.
Exactly.
So you're better off keeping 10 good ones than 10 good ones and 10 bad ones, because
Exactly.
they're the exact
So
same.
my plan for this breeding season is very straightforward. Sit down, Donald, and be very calm and very collected and figure out which birds are worth breeding and which birds can have a happy life playing around in the area. And that's how I'm going to work it and how I'm going to approach it. And I think hopefully that will get us through to when things might be a little bit improved. But there are clearly serious underlying issues about the hobby overall. We're meeting here effectively in quite an international group of people because it's one of the easiest ways to meet other fanciers.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I don't know
And
anybody. I don't know anybody else in this city, capital city of Scotland. I don't know anybody else that keeps canaries.
yeah, well, you're right, because my nearest fancier to me, and I don't live in the middle of nowhere. Yes, I live in a bit of the countryside, but probably my nearest fancier to me is probably an hour away. You know, where when I was growing up in my mom and dad's house, the nearest fancier to me was the fella next door, and the nearest fancier to him was the fella 2 doors down. And if like I'd say within a row of probably 40 houses in a council estate, I'd say there was probably 10 Canary native British breeders, and then there was probably another 10 pigeon fanciers. You know what I mean? And the lads who had pigeons, they were the ones who had the money, because obviously pigeon racing back then and now was more expensive, because you trained them, you had to send them away. A man had to go in a van and send them away for training and things like that. So they were pigeon fanciers or that way. So you're probably right. But how is there a turning point, or is there a focus where the Zoom room concept becomes normal and we bring that into a club level, and that becomes the club format? Because
Well, I know
we,
Jay and I have spoken on a couple of occasions, and in Canada, I think to degrees, we've got similar issues to the ones I have. And they've been running their AGM. I think Jay will correct me if I'm wrong, on the basis of including people in this format at the meeting. And we're trying to do the same thing with the Scots Fancy AGM in March. Trouble is that the hall there, unbelievably, I mean, sorry, I shake my head and I go, electric cars, you're having a fucking laugh. If a local authority hall hasn't got Wi-Fi, how in the name of God do you expect people to have electric cars? So whether we can actually have anybody joining us at the Scott Fancy Club AGM held in Grangemouth in a local authority hall or not, I don't know, because at the minute it doesn't have Wi-Fi. Anyway, put that to one side. I do think that this is a format that's going to become a lot more popular. I also wondered, because it crossed my mind last year, we had been planning to have a Scots Fancy Club show in the January of 2022, but because of bird flu, it was cancelled. And what we did instead was we asked our members to make a film. You'd enter 3 birds and make a film of them, send them in, and we got them judged. And that actually really worked. It was a bit, I suppose it was a bit prescriptive in that we said you can only enter 3 birds, but well, everybody knows which are their best 3 birds. You all know it. Everybody does. You go into the bird room, you know which they are. And partly I was beginning to think that actually for people who can't get out to a show, perhaps their health isn't up to it anymore, maybe we need to start thinking in terms of shows about having classes that are only for people who can't attend and who enter by sending in a video. Why not?
yeah,
It adds to the mix. Ian Wright, who judged the show for us, said the big plus from his point of view was that the birds didn't change from the morning to the afternoon. Just that's quite.
yeah, which
It
always a good,
wasn't going
it's
to
always a good
change.
thing. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I think that there are ways that I if you'd thought before the pandemic, would you have used this to chat to friends in the way that we all have now become used to? I don't think anybody would. But I think
No,
we're only
I think even
scratching at
people
the
in
surface
Australia,
of the technology and what we can actually make it do. But it does need, it needs somebody like you, Paul, to be prepared to organize it.
yeah,
That's what it boils down
yeah,
to. You still are going to have people committed to running the events.
yeah. Like we're going to do something now. Jordan breeding season now is that I'm setting up a live link to my board shed.
Oh, lovely.
So I'll have a live link into my board shed, so you'll be able to access all the cameras in my boardroom. You'll also be able to access nest cams, where I'm going to
Oh,
set it
wow.
up. So I'm going to set it up for 5 of my best pairs or best hens, and you'll be able. It's in the process being done, where you'll be able to. I'll give you an access code, and you'll be able to dial in, and you'll be able to
Fabulous.
check on nests throughout the day. You know, like, so if you're sitting at home and you fancy looking around my boardroom, you can dial in and have a look around my boardroom.
But I think this, the use of technology in this is fantastic. But I was chatting to my friend Norman Wallace the other day, and he was telling me that one of the judges that he's engaging for the show doesn't have a mobile phone, doesn't have an email address, doesn't have this. And I have become, I'll be quite frank, I don't care if I'm controversial, I'm bored hearing the phrase "the left behind." What about the people that chose to stay behind? Mobile phones. I got my first mobile phone in 1996.
Yeah,
It's hardly last week. I've been
yeah,
doing internet banking since the year 2000. I mean, there are aspects of this where I'm going, well, the choices have been, there's not recent, this isn't modern stuff that's untested. It's been going on for decades.
yeah. But I met
So,
people and saying you're right, and people have said to me like, "No, I don't have an email address. Like, I'm not into that technology." And I'll be going, when email was launched, you were 19. Like like the person is in his 50s and he's telling me he's not into that tech stuff. And I'm going, my dad's 84 and he's passed the European computer driver's license. Like, no. And I'd say he's up to awful things on the internet since he discovered it, I'd say. I mean, I'd say he's up to no good all the fucking time, I'd say.
good.
But do you know what I mean? Like, he has his prescription for Viagra because it reduces his blood pressure. I'm sure it does.
It does.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does, you know. But it's amazing. I met people who said that they'd say like their father's 84 and he's all of you, and then their son would be in his 50s and he'd be like, "Oh no, I'm not into that technical stuff." And it's been out since you were in your 20s. Like, I don't understand it. You're right.
Not new.
But the technology, we are getting better. We are getting, like I said, as we're setting up that sort of link to the boardroom and seeing boards being tread and seeing boards reared and chicks and reared and youngs going through the pitfalls. We're also, myself and Adam Kendall are working on an app. We're working on an app at the moment, that will cover the whole hobby. Will cover the whole, and it's going to be like based on like a Wikipedia, you know, that it'll be user friendly. They'll upload the show results themselves because they're at them, whether it's CBS, whether it's Specialist, whether it's Budgie, whether it's Canary, whether it's whatever it is. And then once it's verified by the admin on the app, it'll then be posted as true and honest. You know, that'll be true, and show results and show dates and show clubs and have a location setting where when you're sitting in your house, you go, "I'm looking for a budgie," and I'll come up with a show that's wherever the location is, and it'll be all user led. But like myself and Adam Kendall are doing it. And it's all going to be all user led, you know, it's done in the app store and things like that. So there's progress going that way. But I think this format going forward is going to be something that we're going to use more and more and more. I think you're right in the way around online shows. I think technology can be much better. I think you're going to end up, I'd say, within 5 years, nearly, you'll have a show a year, and maybe brown grading, that will have a judge that's in Scotland, and the boards will be on display in Ireland.
Well, the Golden Finch Club, they did. I don't know if any of you know, have you? Very interesting young guy, the wife and a very young son, but he has one room in his flat in Glasgow that is, and he was instrumental in setting up the British Golden Club, and they had their own section at the national there. They ran that international exhibition. They had birds from 35 countries being judged by a group of Dutch judges, entered from all over the globe. fantastic. And people
Yeah.
that could never have competed against one another or even really met one another. It's breathtaking what can be done these days. And I really think it's going to be the way forward. Yeah, younger people want that type of thing. It's old people like me that are more used to going to face things, but
Yeah.
you have to adapt and change. That's how life carries on.
Yeah. So going back to current breeding season coming up, we were obviously talking about your sort of wants and needs. You're going to breed more for needs than to want. And how many Scots fancy will you like? Will you reduce the number of pairs you've kept and then breed 2 rounds, or will you do stick to tradition and only breed 1 round and then
I'm
birds
only
out?
bleeding. I only bleed one round. There are too many
Out they
other
go.
things in life that need my attention.
Yeah.
And so I probably won't start till April, and because we don't get 14 hours of daylight in Scotland until the middle of April. So I'll start them probably about the 1st or 2nd, see how they get on from there. I'm going to select what I think are the best 6 Scottish fancy hens, and I'm going to be very careful with the cockbirds because I have a number that I like, but actually faults are there and they're not way. With the Belgians, it's much more of a challenge for me. I'm going to show you these. Be turning into a specialist in blues and whites, and actually, I really do like them. But at the end of the day, the question is how brave I feel in letting a blue and white and a blue and white breed, or a white and a white breed. Ian Wright said to me that he reckons white's perfectly okay, but what you might end up doing is producing a double factor white will only breed white. I'm not too worried about that. Anyway, I thought we'd see how we get on. I quite like this one. This one isn't actually this is a youngster from a pair that I bought from Bart Dupont in Belgium. They arrived just before Brexit, the pair, and I've had 3 youngsters by them. A hen that arrived last year, just the one youngster, and she's a blue and white, and this is her brother, who was bred this year. I like him. He's not. I hadn't really done much showcase training with him, so he's a wee bit. He should be up on his hind legs, not sitting with the parents there, but. He certainly has been catching my eye of late because he's so smooth. There's no frilling on the chest there. He's definitely got to be part of the team that take part in breeding.
Are you looking for bulk? Are you looking for? Did we talk before that we are looking for a bit of bulk,
this is quite
bulk on the
fine.
shoulder? A bit of
Yeah,
bulk on the shoulder.
this is quite fine. I'm going to show you another one just now where we can talk about. This one is the world champions youngster this year by a cinnamon hen. So he's split for cinnamon, but again, what I'm pleased about there is that there is very little frilling. You shouldn't really have a fan tail like that. We don't. That's not really what we're after. But the bulk of this bird is quite substantial. Again, we can see at the back there. You can't really see his head when you're looking back on, and he's a lot more up on his legs. This one, so he too is somebody that is going to come into the breeding team, and we see where we go from there.
Will you put him to a flighted hen?
That's a very interesting question because I was just thinking about who I would pair him to, and I think he might well go to one of his aunts. I like her, and she bred. I paired her to her half brother this year, and they produced some very nice youngsters, and one of which I've kept because I think it's actually extremely good. But I do have a large number of whites, so I'm going to have to be brave and give it a go and see how we get on with that. But I'm not overly worried about it. It's a hobby. You mentioned
Is it a bit of an old wives' tale, double white and double white, and is it a bit?
You want my honest view? Probably. It's a bit like waving a magnet over something. I'm going, oh, right, okay, so when did that proved to be accurate. Something around 16:20.
Yeah,
And I don't mean in the
yeah,
afternoon.
yeah. It's
So
accurate.
yeah,
It's accurate 60% of the time, 100% of the time. You know,
they do need bulk, and in fact, the first bird I showed you, his parents are both quite bulky birds. They're not
but there's a bulk on the
shorebirds,
shoulder.
but they're
Are you looking for
very
bulk?
bulky.
Are you looking for
You
bulk
want
on the
you
shoulder?
want you want every aspect has to be a triangle. So across the shoulders and down, at the
Okay.
back the same way. On the side, you've got a big triangle. It's a bird of triangles, and it
Okay.
does need substance.
And
It
do they
also
say,
needs position.
yeah, and when you're saying don't double white, is the double white is like the fifth chain? Will it reduce feather bulk, or is it just high mortality?
Well, allegedly, it's about viability of the eggs and about viability of the youngsters. I've never done it because everybody said, "Oh, don't do that." But I'm now at a point where I don't really have a choice, so I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. But I'm pretty sure Graham said he's used white to white without any problem, and I suspect it's like so many things that I don't know. Apparently, with horses, it's an issue, but these aren't horses, so I'm gonna go and
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
give it
yeah.
a go and see what happens.
So some of my fives look like horses, or some of my, they could win the Grand National instead of the National in Stafford, you know. And then we're going to touch base on sort of heartbreak hotels here. The Gabozos, like have we still got the same hens and cocks from last year? You haven't lost anything that
Nothing's died over the winter so far, but they people the real Marmite birds. To me, they're the birds that remind me that the birds are essentially dinosaurs. But I have said many times, and I've actually posted films on Facebook to prove the fact they will rear their own young. They do it. If they didn't, I can tell you one certain they wouldn't be in my bird room. If it needs a feeder, then it's not a bird I'm keeping. And it's as basic as that. I'm not prepared to go down there.
And you won't be dragged into using feeders and then to produce numbers with the fact that they're viably like a many.
No, I mean, but the simple fact is, I was speaking to my brother earlier on today. He breeds cattle. He's a hobby cattle farmer. He's not a commercial farmer in that sense, and he can get animals in and out the country without any great problem because if you need to swab a cow's throat, it's perfectly possible to do it. But to test birds to be able to go back and forth to Europe, you have to take samples for them, and the samples have to be tested. And the man that's taking the samples is swabbing the birds in the throat. You tried swabbing a canary's throat, but by the time you've done that, the test will go back saying your dead canary didn't have any of these diseases. So the ability of us to continue with the Gabozo as a variety is almost zero. There's about 3 of us keeping birds, and they're all from the same stock. I only have 2 pairs. I'm trying to keep them as diverse as I can, but there comes a point where that just isn't really going to be possible. And they're going to become non-viable. It's a great shame. I've had a lot of fun with them, and they were the first birds that won gold medals in Europe, and I've really enjoyed them. I've said before, and I've published articles and sent photographs to prove the fact they lay their biggest eggs. They're pregnant and they're about to lay because the hen actually is pregnant. You can see that she's going to be laying the next day. I've had no problem really with them. Last year, I think one pair, I think the top bird wasn't old enough and wasn't filling eggs, or maybe just wasn't properly in condition. And the older pair, she just didn't, her stamina just wasn't up to it towards the start of the season. And so as she laid eggs, only one of them hatched. And she lays, but it's out there, it's fine. But it's not. I don't have a long-term future with them. No, it's a shame. I really like them. They're feisty. They fly as fast as anything in the shed, and even if they escape out the cage, you know you're going to have a half-hour of trail right trying to catch them up again. And it's not. It's not a viable future, I'm afraid, for them.
Yeah, and without pulling the plaster off too quick, Donald, and we've spoken probably at length before in private and on Zoom. Do you feel any sort of daylight with Brexit? Do you feel that there's obviously
How can you with a third country? I mean, that's the decision that's been made with a third country, and so you have to abide by the rules applying to a third country. There's nothing more to be said. And it really is as simple as that. What's frustrating was that when I came to Northern Ireland in November to judge there, the Ulster Old Air Club show, people there wanted birds, and I'm going, that's perfectly all right. I'd be delighted to supply you, but I can't.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you can't do birds
I
in
was
Scotland,
disappointed
in
on that
Northern
trip.
Ireland.
Yeah, I was disappointed on that trip because you came one way and I went the other. You came to Northern Ireland, and I went to Walsall. I went the opposite way, you know, I was raging. But so have you I suppose you've had no choice really but to give up hope that that's it, done and dusted,
Well, well, that is the situation.
yeah, and your journey to the world show, like obviously.
Well, people say to me, you know, will you go back to World Show, you go back to Golden Ring, and my answer isn't that complicated, but it's kind of no. And one of the reasons it's kind of no is that one of the things I really enjoyed about going to the Golden Ring and the World Show was I was taking part.
Yeah, you're not a voyeur of birds.
I mean, I can go out and look at birds in my shed if I feel like it. I can phone somebody and say, can you come down and have a look at your birds? Why would I spend a fortune going across to Europe to go and look around a bird show? Now, you say, well, experience, well, I've done that. I don't have to keep doing the same thing over and over again when I can't take part.
So does that mean I take your name off the hotel suite that we have for you? Or are we allowed,
yes.
or are we allowed to bully you? Or we might just go the opposite route. We might just contact Scott. We might just contact Scott, and we'll promise him a lovely holiday, and then you'll have to come with him. That's we
you
Adam
will thoroughly enjoy Belgium. I mean that
we might have to. Yeah, we might have a bit more luck presiding.
Yeah,
Scott
it's a lovely show. That I think is well worth visiting. Even if it's just to see half of the show, which is colour canaries, and walk along the rows and go, how in the name of God do you decide which of these is actually the gold medal winner? Because to me, they all look exactly the same. Now, I suppose you could say that about some of the varieties we all keep, but it's not quite the same. That they are uniform in colour right across. I would find it always impossible.
Yeah, some people have spoken that there, with a change in government, we may have a bit of light. I've heard people speak about it, that they're I'm not getting too political about it, but there's going to be a general election probably in next year or so, and that there may be a change of government. And then we're not obviously not talking about referendums or Scotland leaving or doing whatever, but that there may be a slight change then, that there might be a bit of light, because, but then again,
as my late father would say to you, Paul, oh, the crystal ball fell off the desk last week.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
Yeah. Everyone is saying the same thing. Yeah, everyone is saying the same thing. Yeah. I suppose. Yeah. So going into the breeding season, obviously full of vigor, ready to go. You're going to kick off in April. Anything you're doing differently? You've changed that. You've brought in the way. Obviously, every year we bring in something new. Well, I do. This year,
well, I don't. I'm not. If anything, I've kind of cut back on stuff. Last year, I used on the recommendations on somebody, Bax Selin, which is selenium and vitamin something, I think, which is meant to boost fertility. And honestly, see, made a slight difference. I just used it with the Belgian, and the results were no different than they would have been the year before. What I have wondered, and what I don't quite understand, is sometimes you find with the Belgians that say a nest of 5 eggs, there'll be the middle 2 that are fertile, which is kind of random. You know, you might expect it to be the last 2 or the first 2, but it's the middle 2. And I'm like, okay, interesting. I do think that it's what Ken, Laurie, and I have spoken about this before. I've not seen it written down anywhere in any of the books, but quite often the Scots fancy and the Belgian breed better in their second year of life. So you'll often get the first year, so bird bred in 22, doesn't breed in 23, but it breeds like a rabbit in 24, and will carry on no problem at all after that. Last year, I had a hen, 2017 hen. She won very well at every show she was at that year. And I'd never kept a single birded bred from her since then. And she only ever laid 3 eggs. And it was just perfect expression herself, but nothing worth keeping. This year past, I paired it up with a cinnamon cock bird, just ready to play. I wanted to see what would come of it. 2 absolutely stunning yellow feathered cinnamons. She produced 6 cinnamon hens in a year. Absolutely fantastic. And I don't know, I'm not that technically terribly good, but I have got quite a number of Scots fancies that are red-eyed, but they're clear yellow in colour. 1 or 2 of them I've got a cinnamon feather hiding under a wing cover or something, but generally speaking, they're clear birds, but they're red-eyed. And that I didn't call that Eno or Radula. They're certainly of that format. And I'm enjoying making use of cinnamon in terms of just seeing what colours come out of everything or produce from it. And fortunately, it's coming out in my birds as yellow feathered, which I like. If it's a buff, then I find it a bit dull as a colour.
Because the feather's too fine.
It just looks a bit boring. It looks like it needs a damn good wash. So I tend not to. I'm not wild about it in the buff format, but in the yellow format, I think it's actually quite spectacular. So yeah, I'm going to concentrate on which are the 6 best to work with, and there may be one that I play with for colour just to see what comes of it. The Belgians, there'll be more of them in play. And partly that's because I know that if I use 20 birds, 10 pairs, I might actually end up with 15 youngsters. That's fine, because it's the overall number that I'm looking at, because I've got to transport these somewhere to sell. They're not going to sell next door. There's no pet shops to buy them here. So it's trying to make sense of a hobby that retains the enjoyment for me, but at the same time maintains the stock that I need, but doesn't leave me in a situation where I actually just have a heartache and a cost.
Yeah.
And
the Gabozos, are they all the same colour? Like generally, are they all?
No, they come in all colours, but and they even come in a red factor. But I just happen to only have clears, but they've got the odd ticked feather on them, but they're mainly clears. But I did have originally, the original 2 pairs I bought, there were 2 greens in there, but the youngsters were not green.
And there's red factor. Is that just someone tinkering with colour, just have an extra bit of carpet all red in their shed and decide to feed them? Like,
I don't know. It's a straightforward answer to that. Those who know the breed better than I do would say that there is a difference in the colour. It's a creamier colour, and that's indicative of the red factor. Of course, you enhance it by colour feeding it. But I do have one that is supposedly red factor. And to be quite frank with you, I know my eyesight's beginning to dim as I age, but it's not that bad. and I can't detect anything creamy about it. I can detect a deep yellow. I can't detect anything else.
Yeah,
If I
but
feed it carousel, it'll go red.
yeah, but are we starting to move? Like Adam Kendall is getting pairs of Satinet fifes and Theo fifes, and like I don't know, like are we just starting to move away? Is it because we're getting a bit bored with color and we're trying to invent these? Like it mainly is led by obviously continental breeders where they all breed the majority of wonderful color boards. That like I always find when you go to shows away, the majority of the international breeders, their boards are fantastically colored, and they might not be of a great standard, but in the way of color, they seem to have nailed on the head. And we've seen, I don't know what other colors we've seen. We've seen satinets, fifes, and I don't think it's too long till we see a red factor fife. That a fife is just being a clear fife that's just being filled with Carphenol red, because obviously they're all already feeding with Carphenol yellow, and they're already color feeding fifes as it is, for the richness of color. You see them where they've become burnt on the neck, and there's a deep frosting across the neck. That means that they've been color fed, or sorry, color enhanced with a feed. Do you think that's where we're going to go? Do you see
It
red
depends.
factor
It
Scotch
depends what
fancies?
fashions catch on. If people want to do that and they want to go there with it, well, fair enough. I've noticed that the improvement I obtained with the Scots fancies was by importing some birds from Belgium from a guy called Guido Mertens. And Guido was well known to Kevin McCallum, who runs the Old Variety Canary Club. And Kevin said that Guido, a lot of his birds were being disqualified because people thought they were being colour fed. And it's interesting having bought them, because when they arrived, I thought, gosh, I wonder if that has been colour fed. It was very, very different shade of yellow, a very appealing, warm shade of yellow. But of course, having bred with them, I think the reality is that Guido's stock is overrun by cinnamon. Now, actually, I don't mind that, because if it comes out in a way that is producing yellow-feathered cinnamons that I think are just startlingly good to look at, and it's producing in the clear birds this depth of colour that you just don't see anywhere else. I mean, when I take them out, if I take them out the cage and put them into a show cage, you can see the difference immediately. And I think it's the cinnamon colour, the cinnamon feathering that is doing that. I think that's fantastic. I'm not sure. I did keep Norwich for a while. They were quite good fun. Quite liked them. Like have little dogs in a cage. They'd come over to the door of the cage to speak to you and stuff, and they're nice birds. But having to keep them in one area because of the colour food and keeping away from everything else, and you get to work off. I like things. You said I'm complicated. I'm not really. I quite like things simple. It's simple. It's fun. It gets complicated. I'm getting this is too much.
Yeah, well, I've obviously I've taken in some English cinnamon this year. Obviously same as the Belgians, same as the Scots. We're trying to recreate a breed. Well, I'm not trying to recreate a breed because I haven't a fucking clue what I'm doing. But the whole concept is that we're trying to recreate a breed that is extinct, you know. And there's been a lot of criticism from all different directions from people who are all of a sudden experts or have been keeping them for a long time, and they believe the ones in their shed are the ones of the original bloodline. They're like Napoleon brandy, you know. They seem to think, and it's a difficult one because you're
fragment of the true cross.
Yeah, the fragment of the true cross, you know, and it's a difficult one because the people who are involved in trying to recreate the brand or recreate the board, I'd say 85% are very much novice, are very much new, and are full of enthusiasm. Like I'm very enthusiastic about I'm nearly enthusiastic about too much about all the time, but I'm enthusiastic about the breed. I'm enthusiastic about the birds. I'm enthusiastic about breeding them. I haven't a notion what I'm looking at. You know, like Fraser sent me a picture yesterday and was like, You boards look like that, and I was like, fucking, there's no boards. I've never seen a cinema that looks like that. Mine are definitely more cobby. They're different. They're more Norwichy, Gloucestery sort of, because I think that's what we're using.
Well, they seem to be. I don't know. I stumbled across them, and you don't even know how to thank, but I stumbled across them and wrote a bit and spoke to Derek Dix on the phone, and I found the whole thing absolutely fascinating. What I'm interested in relation to is something that I haven't heard anybody else talk about, but I've noticed they're very easy to catch, cinnamon birds. Very easy to catch. And what that tells me is that their eyesight's not terribly good, because I can put my hand on occasion and pick them up.
Yeah, I'd
And
agree
I'm
with
going, well, that's actually interesting, because is this meaning that they don't really see terribly well? I don't know the answer to that. If any of you are keeping cinemas, it'd be interesting to know whether you've noticed that they don't seem to me. All the cinnamon birds I've got in the shed, I can pick them up, no trouble at all. The others I'm chasing around the cage to catch, but the cinnamons I can just pick up. And that I would have said is possibly the only place where I'd wonder long term
genetically.
How you know, if every mutation is going to have pluses and minuses. So I don't know whether eyesight is something that people have noticed. I don't know enough about.
Yeah, but like yourself, you introduced stock to your Scots Fancy line that had less quality on the top, but had a better curve, you know, to try and get that C curve.
That was totally what it was about. There was
Yeah,
nothing wrong with the stock that I had, but it
yeah,
didn't have enough of a curve. And that's what the birds I brought in have produced, in that a Scots Fancy doesn't have to sit in a curve in a stock cage. But if it already is doing that in a stock cage,
it's an advantage.
you're more than halfway there.
Yeah, yeah. Like, we're obviously, as a club, we're trying to build a breed, we're trying to build things in the right direction, but we definitely are getting a few shots across the brow, that we seem to be doing things wrong. Now, my own understanding is that we don't know what we're doing wrong, because nobody seems to know what's the right direction, because we're trying to reinvent a breed that is being extinct.
Well, the only
lives a
advice I can
worldwide
give
term.
you is ignore people, carry on and do what you think is the right thing to do. And the noise is off, our noise is off.
Yeah, you're always going to have that background noise, because
It's totally, you're always going to have that. It doesn't
yeah,
matter what you're doing in any aspect of life, you're going to have noises off. And the question is whether you tolerate them or whether you tell them to shut up and go on with what you're
yeah. My tact is that we don't engage, that we sort of just stick to the script.
Well, if
Because
they're talking sense, then by all means listen. But it doesn't mean you have to follow. It's not some religious text that's going to lead you to nirvana.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. So really, Donald, that's great. Listen, as always, it's always been an exceptional chat with yourself. I really enjoy our company. I could probably stay here all night and talk to you, but as the lads would be giving out shit, like, no, we'd end up going off course, and we'd end up talking about the LGBT community, and we'd end up talking about the World Cup, and we'd end up in depths that I don't think that we'd ever get to the end of. And we must do that one time, just sitting there having. I don't know what your
Next time
favorite.
I come to Ireland.
Yeah, or I'll come. I don't know what your favorite tipple is. I sometimes think you might be a bit of a sherry man, and then other
I
times
don't drink alcohol.
at all. So
No, the good thing about it, I remember a number of years ago meeting this chap, and he said to me, I'm really surprised you do all these things you don't drink. I go, no inhibitions to lose.
Yeah. Yeah. So Donald, listen, thanks again for coming on. I know I always probably rely and touch off you to try and come on, but you're always a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we always have to crack.
Thank you.
And I really enjoy our company. I'm so glad that we're friends.
Thank you.
And I will sort of open her up there to the floor, and lads will have a discussion, and we'll see if anyone else comes on.
Okay.
But Donald, for me personally, thanks very much as always.
Thank you.